At 2 a.m., the world feels closer than it actually is. A conflict on another continent. A financial collapse in a country you've never visited. A crime in a city thousands of miles away. All of it arrives in the palm of your hand. Immediate, urgent, unresolved. And without realizing it, your nervous system reacts as if it were happening outside your window. The question is not why the world feels heavy. The question is why your brain cannot look away from the weight. But what if the compulsion to consume bad news is not primarily about being informed? What if it is about something much older and much more primitive inside your brain? To understand this, we need to go back long before smartphones, before television, even before newspapers, back to a time when survival depended on detecting threats faster than everyone else. In 2001, psychologists Paul Rozin and Edward Royzman formalized a concept that had been observed in behavioral research for decades: the negativity bias. In simple terms, it is the well-documented tendency for negative events, negative emotions, and negative information to have a stronger psychological impact than positive ones of equal intensity. A single insult weighs more heavily than a compliment. One mistake overshadows 5 successes. A single threatening headline can dominate your mental space for hours. And this bias is not subtle. It shows up consistently across cognitive, emotional, and neurological studies. Neuroscientific research has shown that the amygdala, a structure deeply involved in threat detection, responds more rapidly and more intensely to negative stimuli than to positive stimuli. In experiments using brain imaging, participants exposed to negative images demonstrate stronger and longer-lasting neural activation than when exposed to neutral or positive images. From an evolutionary standpoint, this makes perfect sense. For early humans, failing to notice a potential threat, a predator in the grass, signs of illness, hostile tribe members, carried catastrophic consequences. Missing a positive opportunity, on the other hand, was far less costly. In evolutionary psychology, this asymmetry is often described as a survival advantage. The cost of underreacting to danger is higher than the cost of overreacting. So the brain evolved to err on the side of caution. And in the ancestral environment, this bias increased survival odds. But in the modern media environment, it becomes something else entirely. Because today, threats are no longer immediate and local. They are global, continuous, and algorithmically amplified. In the 1970s, researchers studying media consumption began noticing what became known as the mean world syndrome, a term introduced by communication scholar George Gerbner. His work suggested that heavy television viewers were more likely to perceive the world as more dangerous than it statistically was, largely because violent or dramatic events received disproportionate attention in broadcast media. The effect was not about ignorance, it was about exposure. Repeated exposure to negative content shifted people's perception of reality. Now, fast forward to the age of smartphones. Modern platforms do not merely report bad news. They optimize for engagement. And engagement data consistently shows that emotionally arousing content, especially content that evokes anger, fear, or outrage, spreads further and faster than neutral information. A 2017 study published in Nature Human Behavior analyzed the spread of emotional language on social media and found that messages expressing moral outrage were significantly more likely to be shared. Another study from MIT in 2018, examining the diffusion of true and false news stories on Twitter, found that false news, often more sensational and emotionally charged, spread faster and reached more people than factual reporting. The pattern is clear. Negative information is not just noticed more, it travels more. And algorithms learn quickly. When you pause slightly longer on a disturbing headline, when you click an alarming article, When you comment in frustration, the system records it. It does not understand nuance. It understands attention. And your brain is wired to give attention to threat. This is where doomscrolling begins. Doomscrolling is not officially recognized as a clinical disorder, but the behavior reflects a predictable loop. Negative stimulus triggers arousal. Arousal triggers attention. Attention reinforces exposure. Exposure increases perceived threat. Perceived threat drives further checking. Importantly, dopamine plays a subtle but misunderstood role here. Contrary to popular belief, dopamine is not simply the pleasure chemical. Research in neuroscience has shown that dopamine is more accurately associated with anticipation and motivational salience, the drive to seek information or reward, rather than the experience of pleasure itself. When you refresh your feed looking for updates, your brain is not chasing happiness. It is chasing resolution. You are looking for closure, for reassurance, for an answer that reduces uncertainty. But uncertainty rarely decreases in the modern information environment. There is always another update, another angle, another developing story. And because negative information activates threat circuits, it also activates vigilance. You feel compelled to monitor, to stay alert, to be prepared. The irony is that the vast majority of global news events have no direct impact on your immediate survival. Yet your nervous system reacts as though they might. Chronic exposure to negative media has been associated in multiple studies with increased stress responses, elevated cortisol levels, and symptoms of anxiety. During major crises, such as natural disasters or pandemics, research has shown that media exposure can sometimes predict acute stress symptoms more strongly than physical proximity to the event itself. In other words, watching the storm repeatedly can sometimes affect you more than being near it. And this is not a failure of character. It is a mismatch between ancient wiring and modern systems. The brain evolved for a small social group and immediate physical threats. It did not evolve for 24-hour global catastrophe feeds. So, what can be done? The solution is not to become uninformed, and it is not to pretend the world has no problems. The solution is to understand that your perception of risk is shaped not only by reality, but by frequency of exposure. When negative stimuli are repeated, they feel statistically common, even if they are rare. Psychologists refer to this as the availability heuristic, first described by Daniel Kahneman and Amos Tversky in the 1970s. Events that are easier to recall feel more probable. If disasters are constantly shown, they feel omnipresent. So the first intervention is structural. Limit frequency. Not through willpower, but through environment design. Disable non-essential push notifications. Remove news apps from your home screen. Create designated windows for information intake rather than continuous grazing. Second, introduce counterweight exposure. The brain calibrates perception based on input. If all input is negative, perception shifts accordingly. Deliberately including long-form analysis, constructive journalism, or neutral data-based reporting reduces emotional amplification. Third, slow the loop. Before clicking a headline, ask, does this affect my direct decision-making today? Or is this abstract global monitoring? That single question can interrupt automatic threat scanning. Finally, recognize that feeling compelled to check is not evidence that you are irresponsible if you stop. It is evidence that your nervous system is doing exactly what it was designed to do. The tragedy is not that the brain loves bad news. The tragedy is that modern systems have learned how to feed it continuously. And once you understand that the urge to scroll is not moral weakness, but biological vigilance operating in an artificial environment, something changes. You stop blaming yourself. and you start designing your inputs. Because in the end, the most powerful scarcity in the modern world is not money, it is attention. And your brain will always treat threat as urgent, even when it is not. The question is whether you allow every distant alarm to become your immediate emergency. If this video gave you a new way to understand your own reactions, consider supporting the channel. Liking, commenting, and sharing helps signal that this kind of content is worth producing. It encourages the algorithm to surface deeper discussions instead of louder distractions. Thank you for watching. See you in the next video.